Hello, everyone. I'm Jackson Potter, Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union, and proud to be in the presence of Ashley Henderson, a movement leader in many of our spaces. She's the Executive Director of the Highlander Research Education Center in Tennessee, has been a leader in the movement for Black Lives, Southern Movement Assembly, an advisory committee member of the National Bailout Collective, and why we're here today, a really powerful voice in helping various sectors understand the imminent threat of fascism in America. And the stakes for the labor movement are quite high. We're in a moment where there's great possibility and peril for us as workers in unions. We've got the UAW fighting and forcing the first sitting president in American history to walk a strike picket line. But at the same time, we see continued working class de-alignment from the Democratic Party that has been ongoing since the 1970s. And the MAGA bloc continues to make inroads to our natural constituencies. On the one hand, we've got a president who's, for the first time in over 50 years, hasn't called for cuts to Social Security. Yet a frontrunner in Trump who's seeking to eliminate nearly 100 years of labor relations by destroying the NLRB. So we're in a moment where President Sean Fain of the United Auto Workers says Trump is a billionaire boss and a scab. And my union president, Stacey Davis Gates, has said they want to put people back on plantations. And for these reasons and more, as people in key positions of the union movement, with the resources and people power to make moves to address the political crises we face, we're going to need to get information and have a clear-eyed assessment of the risks and opportunities before us and how to navigate this terrain. And I really can't stress enough, there's not a better person to help us do that than Ashley. So Ashley, hoping you could start off with some comments on what are we up against, especially as trade unionists, and what should we do about it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just really grateful to you, Jackson and Stephanie, for this conversation. That is actually most of you that are listening now coming into a conversation already in progress. I just am so grateful for the labor left for continuing to pay attention to the rise in authoritarianism and fascistic movements that are trying to not only come after every kind of civil liberty and every kind of human rights advantage that we've made over the last several centuries, but really particularly not forgetting to come specifically for workers. This is not a time where just the general sentiment about right to work is a threat. This is not just a time where capitalists, bosses, and the Neanderthals that aspire to be them are just throwing tactical spaghetti at the wall. Why it is a particular heightened crisis in this moment is because they have a plan, y'all. They have a plan, and it's called Project 2025. And anybody who knows me knows that I've been obsessed about it since it became available to read. Project 2025 comes for everybody. It comes for LGBTQIA plus folks, it comes for folks of color, it comes for people of goodwill of all stripes. But it also really does particularly come for labor. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview. I'm not going to go super deep just for the sake of time and what the almost 1,000-page document says. But I am going to give some of the overall context and then get into the sort of protein of the battle plan, what they call a war plan, as it pertains to labor. Project 2025 is an at least $22 million project that is a multi-sectoral, multi-tactical plan for the first 180 days of a GOP presidency. Obviously, I believe that the Heritage Foundation and the coalition of forces that came together to make Project 2025 a reality were likely assuming that Donald Trump would be that president, right? Would be the person that would enact Project 2025 in the first 180 days in his second term. And so, again, this nearly 100-page war plan, as they call it, would essentially move that work through their marshals, the marshaling of their forces to cover every cabinet department in the U.S. government on the federal level, and many of the other governing bodies as well. They're serious. It's, I think, over 80 organizations that have come together across their ideological and value set differences, across their different expertise, right? Some of them are think tanks, some of them are foundations, some of them are identity based, some of them are ideology based. It's all sorts of different conservative and right wing forces coming together across their differences to say, we actually are stronger together, can make impossible things possible together, that in ways that essentially dissolve the federal government, aspects of the federal government as we've known it, and absolve those powers essentially under the presidency. We should all be concerned about that. But let me get specific about why that matters to workers and those of us that throw down for worker justice and for labor. The chapter on the Department of Labor and its related agencies is about 37 pages of the almost 1,000 page document, over 900 pages of the Project 2025 document. And there's the only article really that I've found in several months of digging, an article by Noah Lannard and Mother Jones that really specifically goes into depth about this chapter and who wrote it. So a lot of this information is coming from that. I really strongly encourage those of you that care about this to spend some time in that article. So Noah writes that it's essentially this chapter, this 37 pages, is the same old kind of union busting that the right has always talked about. But what makes this particularly nuanced is that it's got more kind of anti-woke and pro-Christian nationalist language in their description of what they intend to do, right? So there might be things that they are saying are good for workers, are related to Christian ideologies and values, and certainly are coming after what they ascribe to be like left-wing authoritarianism, coming for the rights of all people, with weird opportunities for them to use pro-worker language, but actually doing things that are terrible for workers. I want to offer a little bit of context about who wrote it, because I think you all, especially my OG labor heads, are going to recognize the name. Jonathan Berry wrote this chapter, at least contributed highly to this chapter. You might remember him because he led the Labor Department's regulatory office under Donald Trump. And during that time, he was denied millions of workers overtime pay. He's also pretty well known for making it harder for workers to go after individual offices and restaurants that are a part of franchisees, right? So like for example, McDonald's, if I worked for McDonald's and I went after my particular shop, then McDonald's as a multinational corporation couldn't be held liable for what one of their stores did. Jonathan Berry is no friend of workers here or anywhere. And it's exactly why he was tapped to write this 37-page chapter. But let's get into what he writes in this chapter. Let's start with the sort of neo Judeo-Christian nationalist stuff, because that's where he starts it. He begins the chapter stretching all the way back to the book of Genesis in the Christian Bible, recognizing that fruitful work is an integral part of building human dignity, right? So he starts it that way and essentially identifies the enemy in this first chunk of the chapter. He identifies the enemy as a massive administrative state that is imposing a left-wing agenda that favors human resources, bureaucracies, climate change activists, and union bosses over ordinary workers. You can imagine that he's talking about us. He's talking about the Biden Labor Department. He's talking about the National Labor Relations Board, because we've built, I think we workers have built the most pro-union country that we've seen in decades, and that is uniformly bad for the right wing. So after setting that sort of context, he moves into sections that really don't have a whole lot to do with labor. The connection to labor is quite a bit of a stretch, but is an attack on what we've been doing to build social justice unionism and bringing people together across race dynamics, gender dynamics, sexuality, et cetera, by really targeting things like how the Republican administration how the right-wing president, how Congress should and could, through this project, block critical race theory, limit anti-discrimination lawsuits, promote pro-life policies in the workplace, among other things. He argues that this is like about protecting working families, and in fact calls on Congress to pass the Working Families Flexibility Act, which is, as you know, a Republican bill that labor advocates and that we are advocating against, because it would let employers provide comp time instead of time and a half overtime pay. Right? Again, they are excellent at taking co-opting the language of things that sound good, particularly that we have pushed, and co-opting it and watering it down and making it something that's actually anti-worker. In a similar vein, they are calling for the reinstatement of a Trump-era rule that made it easier to classify people as independent contractors who obviously lack many of the protections that we get as employees of an organization or a company. He labels that plan, which the Economic Policy Institute estimated would cost workers more than $3 billion with a B per year, a part of making family sustaining work accessible. I don't think that costing workers $3 billion per year after the implementation of this project actually makes anything sustainable, certainly work or our families. So he sets it up this way. And then about 19 pages in, he starts to address the role of unions, labor unions. The title of the first section is Non-Union Worker Voice and Representation, which Noah offered gives the game away, right? It's the gag is up. And the top line recommendation in this section is to pass the Teamwork for Employees and Managers Act, which you'll remember Senator Mark Rubio from Florida, the Republican from Florida, introduced. This bill weakens a section of the NLRA that bans company-controlled unions, right? So in exchange, workers would get to be a part of an employee involvement organization, which, typically just lets companies ignore them, right? And gain one non-voting seat on the boards of big companies. This act is a rehash of a bill with the same name that Bill Clinton vetoed nearly 3 decades ago because of the strong opposition that labor offered to it. At the same time, this plan makes it harder to form a traditional union. Project 2025 bans card check, or would ask Congress to do so. The process by which a union can be established if a majority of employees sign cards in favor of unionization and an employer voluntarily recognizes that union. When it comes to collective bargaining agreements, this plan under Barry's authorship asked Congress to amend the National Labor Relations Act so that federal laws and regulations can be set to ask if both sides agree to do so as a part of a compromise. As an example, Barry asks it says workers could forgo some overtime pay in exchange for getting more predictable schedules. It imagines employers agreeing to something that they should already be doing, right? They should be providing workers with reasonable notice for upcoming shifts in exchange for getting out of a longstanding legal obligation. So this is a setup. And throughout the plan, there's a lot of policing that flows in one direction, right? We should be concerned because Project 2025 calls for investigating worker centers, increasing funding for the labor office that monitors union finances, right? But at the same time, cuts the department's overall budget. It calls for the Occupational Health and Safety Administration to get no new power or funding, right? One of the few policies that could reasonably be construed as pro-worker, and again, I think this would be a stretch, is the requirement of mandatory overtime on Sundays. I wonder if you can guess why. It's obviously because people might observe the Sabbath, right? Again, connected to the sort of Judeo-Christian nationalism thread that's throughout this document. He explained that the goal is not to increase pay for workers, but to push more businesses to stay closed on the Christian day of rest. This document calls for Congress to eliminate the BA box, as they call it, on job postings that require applicants to have bachelor degrees. This might feel familiar to you because you'll remember grassroots organizations and communities all across the country who led ban the box campaigns that were fighting for their rights to be, for the rights of formerly and currently incarcerated people to not be treated as though they are indentured servants at best and enslaved people at worst. It's a co-optation of the ban the box movement. And that movement is to ban the box is still a policy that's getting debated even amongst the most liberal of elected officials. But this is what the context of why you should know about this isn't just because of that co-optation, but is also because it's specifically a dig at college educated people who the right has seen in data tend to not vote for the Republican Party, right? More college educated people tend to vote outside of the GOP. So this is their way to troll progressives that have college degrees, many of whom have been really supportive, overwhelmingly supportive of the ban the box movement. It's a petty kind of you would miss it if you didn't pay attention moment in Project 2025. Last couple of things I'll offer. This document is in some ways pushing for things that could be wedges in the right wing that we should pay attention to. I think arguably one of the most important of them being sort of a break with Republican labor orthodoxy, as Noah calls it, to call for sectoral bargaining in the United States. Sectoral bargaining in the U.S. would allow workers to negotiate collective bargaining agreements that cover entire industries, entire sectors of work. There are many reasons, though, that we should be concerned and skeptical about that. And what it would look like in the hands of the right wing. But they are saying that this is a potential that could shift, have a positive shift for workers. And I think we should be cautious and concerned. Them giving us one concession and a sea of things that actually take away our rights is not something that we should pay little attention to. We should pay high attention to. I could go on and on for days. But the moral of the story is that, one, you should check out this article. It gets into much more detail than I have time to do about some of the specifics of this chapter. You should, secondly, read the chapter itself. See for yourself what the right is overtly telling us they're going to do to impact labor movement, to impact workers' rights movements and worker centers, to impact everyday working families. They're not hiding it. They are being very overt. And the thing that you should know about the rest of the document that I've yet to mention that is critical to understanding their capacity to make this possible, this 37-page document and the desires of their hearts for that plan as it impacts labor, is that they are building a database of people that they can bring into the administration now. They are building a database of folks that they can hire as staff that can move this work and get Trump elected now. They are fundraising now. They are 10 steps ahead. So it is time for us to get serious, not only about how to navigate the contradictions of not being particularly excited about Biden, and some of us actually even more feeling not only not particularly excited, but feeling a real disdain for the ways that he has impacted our communities here and abroad, while also being real that this neoliberal is different than this fascist and the authoritarian and fascistic movements that he represents. And recognizing, too, so they have capacity. They have capacity and they're building it. And then lastly, I would argue that we, without a plan, are throwing tactical spaghetti at the wall and praying something sticks. It's time for us to be more serious about what it looks like to actually have a multi-tactical movement ecosystem-wide strategy that prevents this, because Project 2025 isn't just a concern for 2024 and 2025. This plan is written and available to any GOP candidate from the local to the federal level heretofore. This is not just a short-term campaign. This is a campaign to stop fascism and authoritarianism once and for all. And so I feel excited. I feel concerned. You can hear that. But I feel excited because we have more of an opportunity than arguably we've ever had to make the kind of societal and economic change that we've been dreaming of and have always deserved. And my dad would say, there ain't nothing to it but to do it. So that's a little bit about what I think the authoritarian threat is, and particularly how I know it will impact labor.
Thanks so much, Ashley. This was fantastic information. My name is Stephanie Luce. I teach labor studies at the City University of New York and have been working with some unions on developing curriculum on how to talk to members about the threats of authoritarianism. But I'd love to ask you and Jackson, if he also has some thoughts on what are some specific steps that unions can be doing to address this serious concern.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I was raised, the first step is admitting we have a problem, right? There's been, and this isn't just a problem for labor, this has been a problem across sectors, is like, we've had a crisis in base building, some of which is really not our fault, right? Like, how do you base build in the old school traditional way during a pandemic where the state is mandating and actually, like, rightfully so, that we be socially distant from one another? And so I think we're coming into a post-shutdown reality about how to navigate both the digital sector, what it means to door knock in person and build relationships across our differences. When people are learning how to people again, while the crisis of pandemic didn't go away, frankly, many of us are still impacted by the consequences of COVID that are still very ever present in our lives. And the reality of more polarization than ever, and frankly, more war and things that are heightening emotions amongst our people, contradictions amongst our people. So there's a base building crisis. And what happens when some of your revenue and being able to sustain your organization is dependent on recruitment, but not necessarily dependent on organizing, right? I think that's been an ongoing conversation amongst folks in labor for decades, right? Certainly since my time as a junior, brand new, labor organizer with CWA back in the day. And so we need to get serious about the fact that it's time to prioritize organizing. That if we're doing good organizing, the recruitment becomes easy, brainless, really, but only if people have something to be organized into that actually gives them meaningful work that is winnable to change their material conditions for the better. We've got to get back to that work. We've also got to get real about telling the full truth, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, it might be easy to say, vote for Joe Biden for some of us. Certainly not me. It takes, I've been practicing in the mirror for years now, right? Many of us are going to struggle with that. But for some of us, it's easy. And it would be easy to stop the sentence there, right? That you need to vote for Joe Biden, period. Or to say something that is dismissive of the contradictions that people are really living in about what it means to vote for him, right? So it'd be easy for someone to look at me and tell me that, people died for my right to vote. And if I don't vote for Joe Biden, then I'm pissing it away. And I'm basically sanctioning Donald Trump to implement 2025, right? But what that erases is decades of my life where I got to watch my brother be impacted by his crime bill, right? It's ignoring the fact that I literally have comrades that I consider my family in Palestine that are dealing with this genocide in Gaza, right? Like it's erasing the fact that I'm having a real lived experience. And frankly, I would say it's also erasing the fact that people don't feel like the Biden administration actually kept a lot of the promises that they risked their lives to vote for him for in 2020. And I don't mean only risking their lives because of COVID. I also mean because some of us were literally getting shot at the polls, right? White supremacists were actually showing up and threatening us. Certainly election defenders all over this country face that. So it's not fair to tell a half-truth sentence by telling me I need to vote for Joe Biden, even if you're right. What you also have to do is be like, listen, I know this world is a mess. And I know people have been telling you to hold your nose and vote for a really long time. And it is true that if you hold your nose for too long, you'll suffocate and die. And movement actually hasn't given you a plan or built the infrastructure to hold neoliberals accountable in a way that has moved you beyond voting and then getting the result that you deserve, that actually builds your right to self-determination and gets you the kind of governance power that you deserve. Now is the time for us to have the rest of the answer about what the left is going to do to consolidate our power so that we don't get cut off at the knees in the objective united front for democracy that does objectively exist whether we like it or not. Right? There's a whole nother conversation about what the plan should be for us to lead that united front. But right now, we got to live to fight another day to even be able to do that. Right? So how are we going to? If we can't answer that question, then we're setting people up again for another 4 years of kind of the okey doke with neoliberals. And they're not wrong about that. They're not wrong about that. We might win some minimal things just because they've got to give us something. But we'll see, like we've seen in the last 4 years, Biden not really doing anything about immigration that was from movement, certainly not doing anything about divestment from the carceral state and investment in healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities. We saw some symbolic action and some real moves around the infrastructure bill, as Jackson said originally, about his showing up on a picket line, et cetera. Like that was because we had the power to take what we wanted. How can we do that across sector? And again, I think that we have been taught that having an organization to organization strategy and then building coalitions is the way to get there. And I actually think it's go time for us to actually be building a movement ecosystem strategy that actually gets us the power that we deserve. So I think we can't just say part of the sentence. I think we have to finish it for our people, or we won't be trustworthy enough for them to follow in that tactical direction.
Yeah, I think, Ash said pretty much everything we need to hear. A couple of things I might add is, I would predict if Trump's reelected, there's going to be warrants out for the arrest of union leaders. Like, that's the fascist playbook. He's already said he's going to send federal troops to crush protests. Those are different kinds of tactics than what we're seeing from neoliberals or from the Biden administration. Like, people have to get clear-eyed about that. And we need to defend our champions. We have the squad who has really stuck their neck out, and we are in community with that section of the Democratic Party, and we want to build and grow it. And it would be devastating if they lose because they're getting targeted by AIPAC and MAGA money. So in our case, we sent about 15 CTU members, United Electrical workers, and SEIU Pennsylvania members to Canvas this week, Monday and Tuesday, during our spring break for summer leave. But we found some interesting dynamics. The MAGA Republicans are eating our lunch on the left, right? Like, the people on doors were more frequently saying, summer leave's too radical, I'm going to vote for opponent, and I'm worried about Trump and the radicalism of the right. And so we really had to engage people on the question of, well, that there's a MAGA businessman, Jeffrey Yass, who's funding the Democrat opposing summer leave. Do you want to help that militancy that you're against to win this race? And I know you're not that happy with Biden. He's an imperfect candidate, right? But you're voting for him anyway. So you need to do the same thing for summer leave. And that really changed sentiment indoors. People don't want to vote for MAGA Republicans, but they will vote against our champions if we let them. So we have to get on doors. We have to get engaged.
Yeah, my good buddy Maurice Mitchell, the national director of the Working Families Party, often says a vote is not a Valentine. A vote is not a Valentine. And this is about power. And I think partly why I'm so excited about the political education work that all of you are doing is that it's an opportunity for us to get real about the concept of power and what is required of us to get it. And again, I don't think we all have to execute the same tactics. We have difference ideologically, and that might shift where our line of demarcation of unity is. But we've really got to get serious about where that line of unity is and work collectively towards it with all of our tactical expertise, right? This is the season where the direct action was going to get the goods by itself, over. The season where organizing and base building alone would get the goods by itself, over, because most of those folks are making demands that actually have to be enacted via policy. And guess who writes policy? Yeah. Elected officials. So the time that policy can even happen without electoral justice is over. Now we need a multi-tactical strategy. We need a multi-sector strategy, right? There's so many pieces of this that is going to require our collective work. And so I feel excited about the opportunity. I think many of us have been desiring that kind of a united front and to lead in that kind of way for as long as I can remember. Now's the time to do that. We have more opportunity to do that, more positionality, more resources, and more people on the ground, to Jackson's point, that are behind the doors that we're knocking, who are waiting on that level of leadership and really ready to not only do what we ask of them, but are really thirsty for us to tell them how to do that too.
And I think unions are in the best position, are in a great position to be leading on what Convergence talks about as block and build. We're blocking the threats of the far right, and we're building our power as a working class people of color multi-democracy movement. And so I think we can put in links to this video some resources for the block and build study curriculum, as well as connections to the curriculum I'm working on with others for trade unions to talk about authoritarianism, as well as the articles that Ashley references in the talk. So I think there's a lot of exciting directions to go. And I think thinking about it in terms of both doing the blocking, we're not just talking about fighting the right, but we're also building our organizations to have more power so that we're not forced to be in these difficult decisions every 4 years. Thanks so much to Ashley Henderson and Jackson Potter for being with us today. And we look forward to working with you more in the future.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all.